we made the Three Snake Leaves in 1994, and it keeps coming back.
The genesis for the Company of Storytellers of this piece was a sort of crisis, and then a gift that got us out of the crisis. As I remember, we had been working together for about 10 years, doing our Ladder to the Moon shows. And this was had been, quite fun. We'd done an awful lot of rural arts touring, some quite good art centre work, and we were making programs in which we were digging deep into our repertoire and making sure that we were looking at folk tales, fairy tales, and myths. And I think we created very good progressive evenings. But during those 10 years, we also began to do solo shows on our own. And eventually the crisis appeared that if one of us could hold an audience of a couple of hundred people for 2 hours on our own, what was the point of there being three of us? And so with this question in mind, we spoke to Abbie Patricks, and he thought for a moment, and he said, well, then you have to find something that requires all three of you, something that three can do that one can't do. And that was the sort of, that was the challenge. And not long after that, we had been running the Crick Crack Club events following the big storytelling festival at the South Bank Centre, and we were still had a good relationship with the South Bank Centre. And the literature officer then suddenly contacted us and said that there was going to be an exhibition in the Hayward Gallery on Deutsche Romantik, on the Deutsche Romantik revival, and it was a collection of paintings and the whole idea of the German people and the beginning and nascence of the German nation. And so she asked us, could we come up with a show that would complement this? And she offered to commission us. And at that point, we had never had a commission. And I think it was a really paltry sum. It was about £600 or something. But it was like a magic ticket. So we got together, and all of us, the one really strong love that we had together was the Grimm stories. And we thought, well, let's see if we can do something around the Grimms that will require all three of us to be together on a stage.
Yeah, I mean, I always see those 9 years or 10 years that we were working together as the Company of Storytellers as a sort of time of apprenticeship, when we were all apprenticed to each other. And all those performances, we were kind of evolving a repertoire and a way of performance and a way of performing with each other. And I always see the Snake Leaves as a sort of prentice piece. At the end of that 9 years, we made something which was in a way a sort of summation of all that work we'd done before. And it kind of took all of our work onto another level, I think.
Yeah, that's a very good way of looking at it, I think.
Hugh, I wondered if you could just tell us who the Brothers Grimm are.
Well, the Brothers Grimm were in the end of the 18th, early 19th century, were collecting folk tales and fairy tales in Hesse, mostly in Germany. And partly, I think, as a way of trying to find a root culture for what was becoming the nation of Germany. What came from this kind of early folkloric activity is this wonderful definitive collection of European fairy tales.
The show we did in the Grimm's Museum, I know, had Clever Gretchen in it, and they hadn't ever heard it.
Oh.
Yeah.
And so we realized that we were bringing that we were free to approach Grimm's in a way that perhaps because it was such a classic text to the Germans, but also what happened was that we met Monika Mossburger with her spinning wheel, And it was she who pointed out all this language around embroidering a lie and spinning a yarn and the fabrication of a text and textile. And she, she told us and she demonstrated to us how she told stories using her spinning wheel and the kids carding in front of it. And I think that was a key image once we started fitting this story together.
Yeah.
This vision of spinning the yarn.
I think.
Yeah, go on, Hugh.
I was going to say that I think when we started working on the piece, we had no idea that it was going to end up being what it became. I think we started off just looking at stories that we wanted to tell. I was looking through my old copy of Grimm's, and I can still see the marks beside the stories I was thinking of using.
I mean, that's the thing we did first, was we decided to read the whole book. And then we decided to kind of choose maybe 10 stories that we liked. And I put my marks too. And then after that, we kind of pared it down. And what I was thinking about the other day was how the main stories that we chose, I mean, obviously we realized this at the time, but it's a strange thing that the main stories we chose were not classic wonder tales. They were not stories with magic in. They were stories about psychological transformation. They were tricks. There was a heroic journey through something, but those three main stories didn't contain the fairy world.
Except for Hugh's story.
Mine had magic.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Well, yours didn't have magic at all. Neither of yours actually had magic, although they were following the classic fairy tale form.
Yeah. It was much more about an inner worlds.
Yeah.
But I can't really remember. I know we made our long list of stories.
Yeah.
And I think we had some long meetings up by that farm near you, Hugh. But I can't remember how we boiled it together.
I think we started with we set ourselves a brief of telling unfamiliar Grimms.
Yeah.
So we avoided the Sleeping Beauties and Cinderellas. We avoided those. I'm not quite sure why we settled on the stories we settled on. Why
did you choose the two brothers, Hugh?
Two travellers.
At that time, can you remember?
I liked it. It was just a sort of. It was a response. I liked the contrast between the first half and the second half. First half with its very dark downward spiral, and then the second half is light and humorous. I like that contrast.
Yeah.
What was key to at some point, but I don't know if it was after the event or before the event, was that quote from Joseph Campbell that you brought, Hugh, about the
tragic and the comedic
movement from the tragic to the comedic, which was the exact inverse of Nietzsche's comedic to the Apollonian, the Dionysiac to the Apollonian. So, and we felt that was very true to the fairy tale. That we're not dealing with myth here. We were dealing with, and hence the psychology that Pomme is talking about, that we were dealing about something that goes down in order heavy to be transformed into something light.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I think when we'd settled on our stories and looked at them quite intently, we kind of recognized that they all had this tragic moment. About halfway through, each of them was a descent and then a return. I can't quite remember when we thought about making that divide at the tragic moment. So the first half represented a downward journey, and the second half represented a return to light.
I think I can't remember the detail nor the sequence of how we found it, but there was definitely a feeling that sort of, we were helped. It was sort of rather magical. We had these things, and then it just sort of everything fell into shape.
Yeah.
I felt like we were in sort of a flow, and I remember having that we were in St John's Wood a lot as well in my flat, and we
were
paper out, and I felt like we were all inside the stories. I think that Hugh, I don't know where we had the idea that they all went into the forest and came out again. Maybe we did get that quite early, but when I think Hugh had the idea that the main character was not the one telling the story, it was the anti-hero, the one that had Hugh had that idea.
Yes, I mean it was on my list. The Strange Musician was there.
Yeah, right.
Along with the White Snake, and
yeah.
We didn't really reference the White Snake, except that then Hugh came up with the Three Snake Leaves, and so the snake becomes white, that image in it.
Mm. I can remember the moment, and I think it was a sort of almost a collective moment of realizing that we could use the blacksmith in heaven, who becomes the musician in heaven, and have him see from God's throne, yes, those tragic moments from all three stories. I mean, that was a sort of revelatory moment.
It was.
And I don't think any one of us sort of came up with it. I think it was a sort of collective.
I felt, what I remember was this feeling that we were writing in the air. We wrote it together by speaking, and then we gradually patched it together, and we wrote it all down on these massive sheets of paper. And so we had the riddles that each of the character tells, these sort of convoluted riddles that reveal something about them as well, and move the story forward. And we wrote them together.
Yes, I mean, again, that's because the Dream of Schlauraffenland and the Ditmar's Tale of Wonders have been on our lists. And so we wanted to get this sort of nonsense in. And I can't remember the exact sequence, but I think, suddenly this was how we were going to use those stories in the composition of the lies. So we were taking quite often an idea from Grimm's, but actually not necessarily using the Grimm thing, but it was the idea behind it, or the motif behind it.